In the last video, we looked at lesson number 20, was the introduction to participles, and we talked about the present active and middle participles. In today's lesson, we want to talk about the aorist active and middle participles. We want to look at both the form and the function. We want to go over some of the translations of these participles to help you to understand how to translate participles. They are a little tricky because they do have both the verbal quality and the noun quality, but as you look through the exercises here, hopefully that will help you as you're trying to translate and learn the participles within Greek. Let's look first at the vocabulary to identify some of the new words that are in this lesson. The first word, Abraham, would be Abraham. Indeclinable, in other words, there's only that one form of that word. Ionios, which would be eternal, that would be an adjective. So we see Ionios, Ionion, the omicron nu ending, if it was a neuter form. We also have the word for scribe, grammateos, or grammateos for scribe. Once again, because we have the two forms of it, we're talking about a third declension noun with the sigma ending in the nominative case for it. So that word means scribe. Dioko means I persecute or I pursue. Ethnos or ethnous, ethnos would be nation, singular. Ethnous would be plural, and we could also translate that as the Gentiles. Enopion would be before. This takes a preposition with a genitive as the object. Jerusalem would be Jerusalem. It's again indeclinable, so we only see that one form. Kathema would be I sit down. It's a deponent verb, and notice how we have an eta as the first letter of the ending or the theme vowel compared with what we normally have as the omicron. May is a negative particle. It means not, and may and u are two of the negative particles we have in Greek. U is used for the indicative mood, and may is used for everything other than the indicative mood. So if you see a may in a sentence in Greek, you probably are realizing that you're using either a participle or that sentence is using a participle or one of the other moods other than indicative in that particular sentence. If we combine that with day, may day would be and not, nor, not even, again a particle. We could have may day, so we would say neither nor in English as we translate that. Prosopon would be face. Semeion is the word for sign. Now by sign we're not talking about like a street sign. What we're talking about a sign as a miracle. When John wrote in his gospel, whenever he referred to the miracles of Jesus, he used this word sign to differentiate them and help to understand really the purpose for the signs. Jesus performed many signs and wonders while he was on the earth, and they were a sign of who he was, his person, his deity. And John in his gospel message in John chapter 20 verse 30, he says, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. Verse 31, but these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. And so just an important word with regard to signs and miracles. Next word, Simeon, or Simon, would be the translation for that word. Stoma would be mouth, or stomatos, for the nominative and the genitive forms of it, being a third declension noun. Sunagoge would be synagogue. Hudor, or hudatos, would be water. Hudor almost sounds like water. Let's go to section 21.2, which is the form of the aorist participle. This is coming directly from your textbook, so you can follow along in your textbook if you want to with me. And basically, we have the aorist participle, and the aorist participle is built on the aorist stem. So as we know the stem for the aorist participle will be built on that same stem. So as you go in the back of the textbook, where it has all the principal parts of the verbs, you can actually go in there and identify the aorist participle form or aorist stem of a particular verb and know how the aorist participle should look with this. So we have the summary of the endings that we have with this. One thing that I do want to note is that the aorist participles, unlike the aorist indicative verbs, does not have an augment. So in the indicative mood, we can identify an aorist by the augment on it. It would also be the imperfect tense would have an augment. But in this case, when we're dealing with participles, participles don't have augments. So augments are really limited to the indicative mood, and so we will not have them with participles. So we started with the stem of the verb, lu, so there's no augment with it, so it would just be lu. Then we add the tense suffix, first aorist tense suffix would be the sigma alpha. Then we would have the normal sign of the active participle, the nu tau, followed by the ending, which would be the omicron sigma. So the word that we'd have here, so if I'm dealing with the first aorist active indicative participle, we'd have lusantas. Lusantas would be that. So we'd say first aorist active participle, masculine, genitive, and singular. If we look at another participle, if we're dealing with the middle voice, we would have lu, again, the stem. Sa would be the first aorist tense suffix, plus men, which would be the sign of the aorist middle participle, very similar to what we'd have for the present participle, and then the ending. In this case, we would have omicron sigma for the ending. So lusamenas would be the first aorist middle participle, masculine, nominative, singular. Again, these have the same endings, but remember, one is going to be genitive because the present tense, the active voice, will utilize the third declension nouns, whereas the middle voice is going to utilize the second declension nouns. So they just happen to have the same endings, but the top one is going to be genitive. The second one is going to be the nominative form of it. If we want to go with the second aorist stem, or talk about second aorist participles, then we'll have the second aorist stem. Remember that the second aorist stem is usually a change, a dramatic change. So the way I can recognize a first aorist from a second aorist is there's a dramatic change to the stem. So in this case, we have lipon. So lip would be the the second aorist stem. We'd have the omicron nu tau, very similar to what we would have with the present tense participles. Then we have the ending, omicron sigma. So lip antas would be the second aorist active participle, genitive, masculine, singular. And once again, the omicron nu tau is the same sign that we have with the active participles, active voice participles of the present tense. The difference is that you're going to find the stem is going to be quite different as you work with the second aorist, and that will be able to differentiate the second aorist from the present tense stem. And once again, you don't have the augment to identify the difference between present tense and the past time aorist stem. So if we were to look at the conjugation of the first aorist active participle, what you see on the screen would be that conjugation. Notice that in this case we're dealing with a singular. We have lusas, lusantas, lusanti, lusanta. So remember, if we look at third declension, we have a sigma or nothing, as, iota, alpha or nu. Then if we go into the plural, we have s, on, si, as would be the ending. So these are your basic third declension masculine and feminine endings. And remember again that the dative form, the dative locative instrumental form, is going to be different. It's going to actually look more like the feminine singular form, or the feminine plural form of this. So again, just be aware that there are some forms that are changing, or some forms that change a little bit. Just remember the dative form is going to be different. Also, if I look at the nominative singular form, that's going to have a different form. It doesn't have that full sign of that participle. So you just have to understand the abbreviated. So it's good to try to learn the nominative forms of these participles. That way you can see that there's a difference with it, sometimes even learning the nominative and genitive forms of it as well. I'll let you look at the feminine and neuter forms of these in the textbook. So those are all just showing you the conjugation of each one of these, just to show you the difference with the participles as we're dealing with a first aorist. If we're dealing with the first aorist middle form, there's a little bit more consistency with it. And once again, I'll just focus on the masculine. The feminine and the neuter will have the same basic structure to them, except the endings will be different. But here we have the second declension noun endings, second declension masculine noun endings. As, u, o, an, which would be nominative, genitive ablative, dative active instrumental, and also the accusative endings for this. The plural would be oi, on, ois, us, again the same endings that you would have for masculine nouns. The difference is that we have the sigma alpha would be the sign of an aorist participle, and then the mu epsilon nu, which would let me know that this would be a middle participle as opposed to the present active participle. Second aorist, we have lepo, would be the basic root word. And then you can see that it uses the same basic form that we would have of the present tense participles. The difference is that you have a stem that's changed drastically or changed from the original. You can see lambda, epsilon, iota, p for the stem. Now we have lambda, iota, p. And so there's a difference with the stem. In this case, we have a difference of one letter being excluded. And so when you see a word and that word does have a different spelling to it, usually it lets you know it's going to be a second aorist. But notice how we have the omicron nu tau, we have the third declension endings, and so it's going to be very similar to the present active participles, but just to understand that it's going to have a second aorist stem, and when you see that second aorist stem, you know it's going to be a second aorist participle. We can also look at the plural forms, following again that same third declension endings. The dative locative instrumental also has the different form which resembles more of the form that we'd have for the feminine participles. The middle participles, again, we just add the mu epsilon nu. We have the omicron theme vowel that's here as well as the connecting vowel. And then just the endings, these would be the second declension masculine endings. The feminine would use the first declension endings, neuters would use the second declension endings as well. If we want to look at the function of a participle, there's two main ideas in verbs. So with an English verb, we understand that time is the essence of an English verb. So it's past, present, or future. When we look at Greek verbs, we have both time and kind of action, past, present, future, or in addition to that, looking at the idea is, are we looking at a progressive aspect of the verb? So I was loosing, or I am loosing, versus a simple or punctiliar type of action, where we would say I loosed, or I loose, or I loosed would be two ways of identifying that punctiliar action, just simple action that's there. So when we're dealing with participles, they are verbal in nature, and the time of the action is not absolute. So the main verb of the subject, the main verb of the sentence provides you with the timing of that particular sentence. Is it past, present, or future? When we have the participles, the participle relates to the time of the main verb, and so when we're dealing with the aorist participles, the time is going to be prior to the time of the main verb. And a good way of remembering this is that if you think about aorist as a past time, so past time is something that happens prior to the current time. And so the difference here is that the participles use the main verb to get the timing, but is it happening prior to, which would be aorist participle? Is it happening simultaneous with the time of the main verb? That would be the present participles as well. Here's a sentence just to look at the translation of this. If we look for the main verb in the sentence, we can see that the main verb of the sentence was hein, which would be the form of ami, the imperfect form of ami. So we would translate this one, there was, and then we want to identify the participle. So over here, pistu santon would be the participle, and as you look at the sign of the participle here, we have a sigma alpha nu tau, so that would be a first aorist participle, and this would be a first aorist active participle. The omicron nu tells me that this would be the genitive plural form of this one. And so as we look at this word, we can see that there is an article that goes before this, but there's no noun that fits with this. So we would say that this would be functioning more substantively. It's substituting for a noun that would be in the sentence. And so if our main verb is there was, and then our participle is dealing with an aorist participle, it would be dealing with time that would be prior to the time of the main verb. So the main verb is past time. So prior to that past time main verb is where we would have the timing of the participles. So the ones who had believed would be the way that we would translate this. And again, it's prior to the time of the main verb. So there was heart and soul of the multitude of those who had believed. So we're dealing with a past time, but that participle indicates that it's prior to the past time action of this particular verb. And that's basically how you would take and translate these aorist participles. As we deal with voice, in the aorist participle indicates the relationship of the subject to the action as to any other verb form. So when we're dealing with the active voice, we're saying that the subject is performing the action. If we're dealing with a middle voice, in this case with participles, implies the subject is participating in the action. So the action is reflecting on that subject again, or it's being a participant of the action. So if you look at the slide here, you can see the sentence. We have once again hoi pistu samenoi, and notice that we have an article in front of it, but we also do have the verb hoi poneroi, and even before that we have hoi prophete. So these words, because they all have the ending, it's a nominative masculine plural ending, we would have to say that these are somewhat working together. We just have to identify how it's working together. Because the participle has an article in front of it, we would say that this would be functioning attributively. And it's going to be more descriptive in its function within the sentence. And so if we take hoi prophetai, which would be the prophet, but now we have an adjective, hoi paneroi, so the evil prophet. And so now we're further describing this prophet by this participle. So the evil prophet, the evil prophets, plural, who had believed in themselves. And you can see the middle voice, the mu epsilon nu indicates you have a middle voice, and these had believed in themselves. So that's the themselves is the middle idea of this. And these evil prophets who had not believed in themselves did not hear the Lord. And once again, you can see the middle voice where you have the participle, the action within the participle, believed, and then you have the reflexive aspect of it, in themselves. And that brings out the middle case, middle voice with regard to these participles. Let's take a look at this last slide. Here we have a couple of Greek sentences that are showing the timing of these participles. So we're dealing with a participle that is an aorist participle. Aorist typically is past time, but remember with a participle, the time comes from the time of the main verb. So if the main verb is present and you have an aorist participle, the participle's time is going to happen prior to the time of the main verb. If you have a past time or an aorist verb in a sentence, then the timing is going to be, again, prior to that past time. So we have a past time sentence, but prior to that past time of the verb is when the action of the participle took place. So if you look at the first sentence, ha anthropos epon tauta blepe ton kurion. What we have is epon, our participle, is going to be aorist active participle. Then it's going to be nominative masculine singular. That goes along with the article and the noun, all nominative masculine singular. So this is functioning as a unit. And so we would translate this as the man, ha anthropos, the man, and then we'd say, who said these things? So that would be the translation of epon. And notice in this case, we're dealing with an aorist participle, so the man who said these things is seeing the Lord. So blepe is a present active indicative, third person singular verb, so it's present time. So the participle is actually taking place prior to the present time. So the man is seeing the Lord is essentially the sentence, but the man, prior to seeing the Lord, who said these things, is the one who saw the Lord. And so that just kind of gives you an idea of, as you're trying to translate this, that an aorist participle is going to be prior to the time of the main verb, whether the main verb is present or if it's going to be past time. It's going to be prior to that time. If we look at the second sentence, we have epusa tauta ek elthen ek tu oiku. So epusen is going to be our verb. Again, it's coming from the same verb, epon, meaning to say. In this case, we have the participle is going to be aorist active participle, feminine nominative singular. And so we would identify from the verb here, the verb is going to be an aorist active indicative third person singular verb with the epsilon nu ending. And so the time of the main verb is past time, so she went out of the house. So the participle is going to be prior to that time. So when she had said these things, she went out of the house. So in order, the first thing happens is that this woman said these things, and then she went out of the house. So you can see that the participle takes place prior to the time of the main verb. Let's look at the third sentence. Ha anthropos, ha epon, tauta, elthen, eis ton oikon. So we have the same noun, ha anthropos, as the first example. We actually have the same participle, epon, tauta. The main difference is that we have an article here. Usually the article is indicating that we have the attributive function of the participle. So we'd say the man who had said these things. Now notice that there's a little difference in the translation. The man who said these things or the man who had said these things. What we're trying to do as we're translating this, we're trying to identify that we have elthen is going to be our main verb of the sentence. Elthen would be aorist active indicative third person singular. So once again, we have another aorist. So we have to make sure that as we're trying to translate the participle, that we're showing that the participle's action took place prior to the time of the main verb. So the man who had said these things went into the house. So that's showing the timing ahead of time. So again, the sequence is man said these things and then he goes into the house. And the last example is very similar to the second example that we have. But once again, it's being stressed here who had, because you're trying to identify that the timing of this participle is prior to the timing of the main verb in the sentence. So hopefully that gives you a little idea of translating these participles. You can use this as an example. Try some of the exercises on your own. I'll check over your work and try to provide some feedback for you, whether you got close or not, and give you some hints as to working with these translations and helping you to understand a little bit more about how to translate participles. They're difficult because you do have a verbal part of them, you do have a noun or adjectival part of them, and there's a lot of components with this. But in the file section in Canvas, I have put a document there that gives you the information for how to know if you're translating, or how to know how to translate a participle. So does it have an article? If it has the article, does it have a noun that agrees with in gender, number, and case? Does it not have a noun that agrees in gender, number, case? Does it not have an article? And it goes through each one of the steps to help you to know how to translate this. So take some time to work on it. If you have some additional questions with this, I'll be more than glad to help you with this. Just text me or email me. Thank you so much for watching this video.